I shudder to think what might have happened to you, Anastasia, if you'd have fallen into the street. Hello, friends. My name is Elizabeth, and today we are talking about types of dialogue that give your readers the ick. So, let's get right into it. The first one I like to call book speech, and that is the one I shudder to think falls into. These are the lines of dialogue that, as you're writing, just sort of fall out of your brain and into the mouths of your characters. And you're probably thinking, well, since I can imagine people saying this in my brain, that must make it a good line of dialogue. Like it's a real sentence that real human beings would speak to each other on a day-to-day basis. Except that it's not. When was the last time you heard anyone say, I shudder to think, in their everyday life? Let alone a rich, playboy, 27-year-old man. Christian Grey was 27 when he said that. It just doesn't fit. I tend to think that book speech comes from two different places. The first is from really old classic books that you probably read in high school, and some of those lines of dialogue just sort of got stuck in your mind and then just float around in there until you're writing your own characters and you end up giving one of them the same speech as a nobleman from the 1800s. There might not have been anything wrong with that line of speech back then, but it in no way works for modern characters now. And even then, it's possible that older books didn't even represent the way that real people talked back then, but instead were a more polished idea of how people should talk, like a more stilted version of everyday language of people of the era, in order to actually get written into the books of the time. The second place that book speech comes from is when writers accidentally, or, less than accidentally, recycle speech from books that they've read recently, not realizing that those books were also relying on unrealistic book speech for pretty much all of the characters' dialogue. See, this is how we end up with a 27-year-old billionaire unironically saying, I shudder to think, to his love interest. I mean, picture a 27-year-old man. Those words, they just don't form on his lips. They just don't. Anywho, the second type of cringy dialogue is the exposition dialogue. This is that widely mocked form of speech that includes anything along the lines of, as you know, Christopher, your mother, who passed away from ovarian cancer, would want you to pursue your dreams of performing in Cirque du Soleil. This is the type of sentence that is being spoken exclusively for the reader, and would never actually take place in the world of the characters, because they would have no reason to say anything like that in their real lives. Christopher knows who his mother is, how she died, and also knows what his dreams are. In real life, if one character was trying to remind another character that their mom would have supported their dreams, they would simply say, your mom would have wanted you to. And that's it. No other context. They probably wouldn't even say each other's names. People don't really say each other's names that often in real life. A little tidbit for you. Real people in real life don't need context for the scene. And that's what you, as a writer, need to keep in mind. You aren't writing for an audience. You're writing real words spoken between real people. Because that's what your characters are in their world. Real people. No audience. It is up to you, as the writer, to give your reader the context necessary to clue them in to that information about Christopher's name and his mom and his dreams about joining Cirque du Soleil. Exposition through dialogue is not the answer. But don't feel bad if you've been writing exposition as dialogue, because big-time writers do it all the time. Exhibit A in this Hallmark movie. Hey, I thought I heard my oldest son. Number 3. So this next one is a little bit harder to catch, a little bit more subtle. And that is trying to convey an established romantic relationship between two characters by making them mention it during inopportune moments. I realize I did not create a catchy title for that one, but oh well, let's call it, awkward love phrases. Maybe that title will help you remember not to do it. So here's what it is. Basically, you have two characters in a story who are already in love. Perhaps they fell in love in a previous book and now you're writing the sequel, or they're just two characters that are supposed to be in a happy romantic relationship. And you want the reader to know that. So instead of relying on subtle, realistic clues, small words and actions between the two characters, to indicate to the reader that they have a strong romantic relationship, you instead give them lines of dialogue like, hey, do you want to grab dinner? With my gorgeous husband, of course I do. Or, hey sweetie, I know there's an alien invasion, but as soon as this stuff is all over, you and I are going to live the lives that we always wanted to. And it's just kind of... it feels gross. Or like something an internet pickup artist would say, or like tell you to say to a woman to try to get her to go out with you. Not something two people in a long-term relationship would ever actually say. Awkward love phrases. Just try to avoid them, baby. Number 4, other people's jokes. Or I guess we could call them overused jokes. Think quippy action heroes saying, I was born ready.
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 Born ready, mother.
Or, that went well after a disastrous fight.
Oh, that went well.
That went well. That went well.
That went well.
That went well.
Or a quirky girl at a football game saying, "Go sports!"
Go sports.
Go sports!
Go sports?
Or a tough soldier talking to a computer hacker and saying, "In English, please."
In English, please.
In English.
In English.
In English.
Or a character saying, "I'm not doing that," followed by a cut to a scene of them doing it.
I'm not doing get help.
Get help!
Or two people hiding behind a counter and one of them says, "Why are we whispering?"
Why are we whispering?
Why are we whispering? Why are we whispering?
Why are we whispering?
You know, just any variation of those common phrases that we've heard a million times in books and movies, where the writers were trying to lighten the moment, you know, of a tense scene or battle or something, by just tossing in, you know, a little familiar quip. But the thing about comedy is, in order for anything to be funny, it has to be unexpected. Like, it has to also be set up in such a way that after the audience hears the punchline, they're like, "Oh my god, that's so smart and perfect, I can't believe I didn't think of that joke." But relying on old, overused jokes to lighten a tough scene will never be funny. It can never be funny, because we've seen that scene before. We know the punchline, and we aren't going to laugh a second time. If you need to lighten a tough scene, you can either practice comedic writing and come up with your own joke, or you can think up some other way to lighten the mood besides slinging familiar one-liners at your characters. I mean, you can do that, but it basically will never add anything to your story. It's like you just kind of gave up on that line instead of trying to think of something original. No one is going to read "In English, please," and then come away from the scene thinking about how memorable and clever it was. You know, it just doesn't add anything to the story. So even if you don't think your audience will be actively annoyed by overused jokes, I just don't think there's a reason to use them. Number 5. Using cliche lines of dialogue instead of mining for real emotion. My titles for these are falling apart. Okay, but here's what I mean. There are some lines of dialogue that have become overused cliches because writers rely on them to add emotional depth to a scene and to tug on the heartstrings of their readers. Lines like, "Don't you dare die on me."
Don't you die on me now.
Don't you dare die.
Don't you dare, don't.
Don't die on me!
Don't you die on me!
Or, "Tell my wife and kids I love them."
Tell my wife and kids I love them.
Tell my mom I love her.
Or two characters getting interrupted during a tense fight and then one of them says, "No, come in, I was just leaving."
I was just leaving.
I was just leaving.
Just leaving.
I was just leaving anyway.
I was just leaving.
Yes, I was, just leaving.
I was just leaving.
He was just leaving.
Or one character is injured during battle and the other one says, "No, I'm not leaving you."
No, man, I'm not leaving you.
No, I'm not leaving you.
I'm not leaving you.
No, I'm not leaving without you.
I'm not gonna leave you.
No, I'm not leaving you.
You know, all of these lines are cliche because I can literally sit here and recite them to you, you know, from just pulling them off the top of my head. I've heard and read them so many times that they no longer carry any real weight. And that is the problem with relying on cliches in general. They won't pull the emotional punch that you're hoping they will. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the scenes themselves are overdone and can never be used. You know, people get interrupted during fights and one of them will walk out. People will scream at their loved ones when they're dying, beg them to come back. That happens in real life. Soldiers will risk their own lives to save their friends rather than fleeing without them. Those things do happen and can happen in your story, but you just need to be aware of the dialogue cliches that can pop up in those familiar emotional moments, and then make sure you aren't using them. I mean, it's that easy. For example, instead of giving your hero some throwaway line to a person on their team by having them say, "Tell my wife and kids I love them," try instead to get creative with the moment. Turn it from an overused cliche line of dialogue that will mean next to nothing to your audience into a truly memorable emotional moment by changing it up. Maybe the character is able to write a final note or leave a voice recording. Let them say the true real words themselves to their family, even if their family isn't actively listening, you know, like on a message or something. Maybe they can't speak, but they can press some memento into their friend's hands, and then their friend knows they have to get that back to their wife somehow. Maybe they're alone and helplessly carve their final message into a tree, in the vain hope that someone someday will find it and get it back to their family. Just anything to take that cliche line of dialogue out of your story and replace it with your own true, inventive, emotional moment. You know, make it mean something again. Number 6. This one is a little bit more of a general warning about cliche dialogue, and that is what I like to call villain lines. These are just any lines of cliche dialogue that we hear villains say over and over again. If you give your villain these lines of dialogue, it makes it very hard to convince your audience that they aren't just some flat cartoon caricature of a villain. Really, no matter how good their backstory is, or how much other character work you've put into them, if your villain says things like, "Why won't you die?
Why won't you die? Why won't you just die?"
Why won't you die?
I want you dead!
Well, well, well.
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 You're either very brave or very stupid.
You're very brave or very stupid.
He's either very smart or very stupid.
I don't know if you're either very dangerous or very stupid.
Very brave. And very foolish.
So we meet again.
So we meet again.
So we meet again.
So, we meet again.
So we meet again.
This isn't over.
This isn't over.
This isn't over.
This isn't over. This isn't over.
When I'm through with you, you'll wish you're dead.
When I'm finished, he wish he were dead.
When I'm through with you, you're gonna wish you were dead.
You're gonna wish you were dead.
You'll only wish you were.
You're gonna wish you were dead.
Or the hero comes to defeat them and the villain says, impossible.
Impossible!
That's impossible.
That's not possible!
You know, just be aware. When you're revising your story, really look at every line that your villain says. And if you can imagine a different villain saying the same line in some other story, then you should probably rewrite the dialogue. Or else run the risk of your audience getting bored by your cardboard cutout villain. Number 7. Finally, everything I just said can be negated and you can still end up with a story that readers love. If you're writing camp, then write camp. Readers will love it. They'll eat it up. Let your hero say things like, "We've got company," when the bad guy comes in. Or like, "Kill them all," when those bad guys hurt his love interest. People will eat that up. If that is how you set up your story, that you're reveling in these cliches and you're just doing it, for the fun of it, you're writing a fun adventure story, those types of stories are popular. I enjoy them. If I'm in the mood for a fun, campy story, and I see this book and it's presented as a fun, campy story, then that's what I want. I mean, maybe that's what they were going for when they wrote Christian Grey, but I don't really think it was. Because instead of giving him like fan favorite villain dialogue cliches, they gave him like fancy grandmother from World War II dialogue cliches. I shudder to think. And that's when cliches get writers in trouble. Because the writer is trying to write something serious and meaningful and emotional and original and new, and instead they're using these cliche lines of dialogue that belong in a fun, campy story. You see the difference? Please like and subscribe.